perennial question seems to be the image of the industry, and what does the industry look like both to itself and to the people that it serves. What's your take on the image of the industry?
Well, I think that the industry has a schizophrenic view in both the public and within itself. Lots of people, their only interaction with the security industry is when they were in a nightclub when they were 21 and they maybe got roughed up by somebody. And so they've got, you know, a middling view of somebody who is not very good at talking, not very good at communicating. Whereas in fact, the security industry, as it should be, is one which communicates, is part of an organisation, actually is looking towards the best outcomes for the organisation rather than necessarily, you know, out there as a bouncer or something like that. It's very difficult to disabuse the public of that view. Governments have attempted somewhat to do some of that sort of stuff in terms of the security regulation. There are questions as to whether or not that's worked and whether or not that has been an overreach for the security industry in some means. And of course, there's also what people would call the cybersecurity industry, which to some extent sits aside from the traditional security industry, but shouldn't. Security has to be about the information and the people that you're trying to protect and the organisation. And it's about trying, as I said, to actually sort of help the organisation do what it's trying to achieve. Whether that is a bank trying to help its customers and protect its customers and make its bottom line, or whether it's a nightclub. It goes all the way along.
What is the industry doing about that?
The security industry launched something called Security Professionals Australasia. And the aim of that is to develop an accreditation scheme which is in line with the professions, similar to a doctor or a lawyer. Now, there are advantages for security professionals in that once the system and the scheme is accredited, there are financial advantages in terms of the amount that an individual who is a professional can be sued and such like, so the professional indemnity and such like. But there are also great advantages from the society in that they are able to develop standards, maintain those standards, and also they are able to have the industry itself regulating itself. As you probably realise, there are any number of specialisations within security industry, all the way from the people who understand the locks and details about how different bylocks work or whatever, through to people who understand firewalls. And no one person, however clever they are, will understand every bit to the detail that they need to actually secure a large organisation.
How do you overcome that problem of fragmentation though? I mean, you've got a large diverse industry, you've got suppliers, you've got buyers, you've got consultants, you've got managers, you've got government. How do you overcome that level of fragmentation?
Well, it's a really difficult challenge, and I suppose that the aim of Security Professionals Australasia is to effectively to be the peak body bringing together all the various organisations that represent those disparate parts of the security industry, whether that is ASA, or ASIL or any one of the other ones. ASIS, you know, you can reel off the acronyms on your fingers and you run out of toes. The idea is to bring together that and actually be able to speak to governments, both federal and state and local to some extent, and say to them, look, we are able to organise it ourselves. We are able to make this easier for you.
What's the sticking point? I mean, at the end of the day, medicine's a disparate profession.
Yep.
You know, but we can still identify a medical practitioner, even though she may be a radiologist, but we can still say that's medical professional. What's the sticking point with security? Why is it so complicated? Why is it so difficult to identify a security professional?
I don't think it's difficult to actually identify the people who are actually very competent at their job. What my sticking point is that it may not be possible to actually identify the career path or the path to which that point comes. You know, the path to which you know, somebody becomes the CSO or the Chief Security Officer of a major organisation. They may or may not have a qualification from a university in security, but they may have developed it along the way. And I think that part of the issue is also that lots of people come to the profession in different ways. They fall into it in some ways, and some are good, and some are not so good.
Is that not part of the problem, though, that the people that are making these decisions would actually have to admit that they're not qualified? They wouldn't qualify. If you say, right, the minimum is an undergraduate degree, and you look at 70% of your profession doesn't have an undergraduate degree, without some sort of grandfather clause, but at some stage someone's got to draw a line, haven't they?
Until we actually understand the landscape and what is actually available and the quality of the various offerings in there, and also then we can to some extent compare and contrast both life experience and university experience, it'll be very difficult. But I think that's probably the path to which we might be on. What are we doing about attracting women? Well, I suppose the industry as a whole is not doing an awful lot at the moment, and we should be doing a lot more. I don't think we can get away from that as a statement, but at the same time, we generally need more diversity in the security profession. I genuinely think that you need much more diversity in all of these professions, and it's important that these people come from different backgrounds. If we talk about the countering violent extremism space, obviously if there were more people who looked like the youth that are becoming violently disposed in the security industry, that would definitely help in that they would see somebody like them doing a job like that. And I note that the Australian Security Medals Foundation, at least 2 of their major winners this year came from Muslim extraction, and that was really impressive to see. The security industry, like many industries, struggles, I suppose, probably because the military and the police, from which a lot of people come from, are dominated by men, unfortunately. And I don't think, it's not intentional. It certainly isn't intentional from me. And we would love to see more people in our organisation. And we have a couple. We have a couple of really impressive people. But it is difficult for them and for the industry.
I want you to talk a bit about the role of the consultant in the industry nowadays, because a lot of stuff is being outsourced. A lot of knowledge is not necessarily needed all the time, full time within an organisation, and sometimes the easiest way of sharing that information is through consultants. So what's the role of the security consultant?
It is about specialist knowledge. To some extent it is also about bringing an external view. We talked previously about the benefits of diversity. Well, at some times, in an organisation, groupthink can prevail, and that can be dangerous for any organisation. And so a consultant can, if he or she is competent, can actually bring a divergence of view. And because they hopefully are a specialist in their field, they can bring together the latest thinking, whether that is from academia, whether that's from government or from other organisations. And in doing so, hopefully they refresh the thinking within the organisation and allow it to re-examine some of its practices. Some of my greatest successes with organisations have been in terms of asking them why they're doing a particular process. What's the benefit for doing that process? What's the cost of doing that process? And for instance, I was working with a government agency on their personnel security, and we had to rethink about what their processes were. And in fact, what happened was that they were using the external agency to do their personnel security, but their internal HR processes were on paper doing all the things and more that they should have been doing. In emphasising to them the benefits of actually ensuring that the processes within their HR organisation were robust and that they were accountable, they could minimise the use of the external agency, saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars, which they could then put on to a more beneficial risk minimisation process, which was aftercare of their personnel security. The consultant understands his or her field. He or she, he in my case, brings to the organisation that new thinking, brings to them the thinking of other organisations. I feel that the big pressure on me is to be well read and understanding what the field is and be well connected with what other organisations are.
Your company called Resilient Outcomes, so you're not necessarily a security manager. What's the difference there?
Resilience, I suppose, is about the organisational longevity. It's about organisational strategy. Most organisations do not live very long. More organisations are not around than are around. And if, for instance, you look at the New York Stock Exchange, the time that an organisation lives, you know, if you consider an organisation having a lifespan, is getting shorter and shorter. What I'm trying to do is help organisations with their resilience. And in doing so, I help them think about adaptability as an organisation to the changing world, to the brittleness of our information society and such like. And so that's why the organisation is called Resilience Outcomes. I see that security is part of resilience. It is an adjunct onto it. It is not the whole piece.
Made the switch from working for government to working as a consultant. Walk me through that. What were the challenges of suddenly going from a nice cushy government job with the Attorney General's Department to suddenly being out there hanging your own shingle?
There always are advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that you have a steady pay packet in government. The disadvantage is that you cannot be as agile, and so you can't put your ideas into practice. As a consultant, to some extent, you have to have the confidence that your ideas are right. It's a brutal sort of life. It's survive or not. And in working with organisations, which I enjoy doing, it's developing me as a better, you know, a more rounded individual. Sort of developing some of the thinking that I had within government in terms of identity, biometrics, resilience we mentioned, and such like, protective security, and trying to apply that in a practical sense with organisations. A lot of my clients are government agencies who don't understand their own governmentees. And it may be a state organisation that has 3 people which is responsible for the whole of security for that state. And to try and work with them on the policy and how you actually implement policy coming from the Attorney General's Department is an exciting challenge and can be really challenging, but also can be really satisfying when you get it right.
Alex, I want to reprise the question. One of the questions that was asked to me is about research priorities. So within the security profession as you see it, what do you think the key research priorities are there?
One of the best areas of research, and we can talk very much about whether research priorities work or not, is the area of behavioural economics. Because behavioural economics is an area that is not well researched in terms of its efficacy with the security profession. What do I mean about behavioural economics? It's about trying to use positive influences or positive nudges, as some people might call it, to get people to do the right thing. Most people are not doing the right thing because of inaction, laziness. Most people are lazy. They don't do their security clearance papers on time because they don't have an incentive to do it until somebody goes and annoys them. However, if they were paid, I don't know, $20 if they did it early, that might have an effect. And I think that we don't know. We don't understand, you know, what are the incentives and is it possible to actually get a better security culture in an organisation through behavioural economics. But there are many of these interdisciplinary sort of areas. Another area might be areas of organisational size and its effect on security. I worked with an organisation that was expanding from about 110 people through to about 200, and their security challenges were magnificent. How do they communicate within the organisation? How does the top level management communicate with its people? How do they maintain a culture of security? If you have a smaller organisation, that organisation, everybody knows each other, at least on nodding acquaintance, and you know that that person is who you say they are, and on a physical security perspective, you can actually sort of say, well, that person is a he, not a she, or whatever. But when an organisation gets too big, lots of these things break down. And there's a guy called Dunbar that's done a lot of research on some of this stuff in terms of organisational size and such like. But its application to security, its interdisciplinary application, there's little, if any, research done on that. So the Dunbar number is around 150 people. It's theoretically the number of people or relationships you can have as an individual, the number of relationships your brain can hold in one time. And the idea is that you can hold around 150 relationships, whether that's online or offline within an organisation. So somewhere around, and some of this research is still a bit new, bleeding edge, and maybe disproven. So that's another question too. But I think it holds true, at least from an organisational perspective, is this idea that beyond about 100, an organisation has to rethink its security. But there's nothing that I can point to beyond to an organisation, and when I'm talking to a CEO and saying, you need to strengthen this and that aspect of your security because you're doubling in size, that I can actually sort of say, well, it is written and you know, this is it. I can say there is research which actually sort of suggests that this might be the case. And that's more of this sort of stuff about a good security consultant, and I hope that I help organisations, actually helping the organisation to understand where the latest thinking is. If we bring it back to security professionalisation, because I have a science degree, a biological science degree, I can actually sort of put some of these concepts into a biological concept, and actually sort of try and help organisations in some ways think about themselves as a biological entity.